We were still at 120 feet, so we hadn't started coming up yet. So we were still, on our tour of the wreck, and we were still looking at doing our swim throughs and still checking everything out. So I had to basically stop him. We had to stop our dive and move to the ascension rope and make our ascent together, and sharing off the same tank. This was a dive trip for me and my buddies. There's a group of 5 of us that got certified together. They're really good friends of mine that I've known since I was a kid. We had already been on, several dozen dives together, so as a group. This was back in 1996, so even at that time I had already known them for over 20 years as we grew up together. But we had been to Cozumel together, we had been to diving in California and Coronado and in Mexico. And this was kind of our first really tropical trip. We decided to take a trip to the Bahamas to do some different dives. We did a shark dive, and we did a night dive, and we did some deep dives. And the one that I ran out of air on, that was a deep dive. That was a dive on a wreck. I think it was called Theo's Wreck. That dive was about 120 feet deep, and so that makes it a little more complex. That's deeper than a normal recreational dive. So you have to be careful about how long you spend down at the bottom, and also about how quickly you ascend, so that you don't get in trouble and don't get the bends on the way up. So that was kind of a technical dive, and it had to be planned out that we had stops along the way coming back up, so that we had time to decompress as we went back up. So we did the dive. It was awesome. That Theo's Wreck is a cement freighter that they sank. I think it was several hundred feet long, but we had about 15 to 20 minutes at the bottom. So once we got down, we got to check out the wreck itself and do some swim throughs, which is where you swim into, you actually swim inside cutouts of the ship. So we were actually, swimming through the different decks and stuff of the ship. And I don't know how long it had been sunk, but there was, obviously a lot of sea life, and there was lots of coral and stuff, and a lot of cool stuff to see. So, we all went down. Going down is easy. You get down pretty quick. But before I was ready to go back up, I got dangerously low on air. So as I figured out pretty quickly that I wasn't going to have enough air to get through my decompression stops and get to the top. So you always dive with a buddy. There were 5 of us, but I still had a buddy kind of assigned to me that, we stay real close to each other. So I had to go find him. I had to signal to him that I was basically out of air. And by the time I did, I was out of air. So my buddy was Sean, and luckily, this is someone that I've known all my life, and I could depend on him to know that he was going to be, there and able to help me. So I signaled to Sean that I was running out of air, and there's a process, that you train on, that if this ever happens, there's a method for sharing air. Every diving apparatus has a main regulator plus a backup regulator. So he was able to still use his main one, and I had to share off of his backup regulator. But that required us to stay right next to each other for the whole balance of the dive and to ascend together and everything. But that was still, it was really important to make sure that you dive with a buddy and that someone's there with you. Because if Sean wasn't there and I ran out of air, then I was in trouble, because you can't just pop up to the surface. especially at that depth. I needed at least, probably 5 to 7 minutes to go up from that depth. So I couldn't just, and you can't hold your breath for 5 or 7 minutes. So diving is, it's a little scary to begin with. And then if you're put into kind of an emergency situation, it is easy to kind of panic and do the wrong thing. But thankfully, that's what you train for. That's what you do all through your certification process, is you practice the things that could go wrong. So that's what you do over and over. You practice, if your regulator falls out, how do you get it back in? Again, if that was your last breath, you lose your regulator and it's hanging or hung up on something, you need to be able to know how to get it back in your mouth so you can take your next breath. So you train for that stuff. You train for if your mask fills up with water, or if your mask gets kicked off your face, or if there's just an emergency. So it was scary, but I was scared just because I knew what the consequences were if I didn't have any air. So but it wasn't like a panic situation at all. It was just, I let him know that I was out of air, and he knew what to do because we had trained together and stuff. So he knew that, okay, this was the end of the dive and we'd have to share to get back to the top.